This conference will now be recorded.
Hello, First United Methodist Church. It's good to be with you today. I have the privilege of being with not only a colleague, but a friend, Nathan Adams, who is a pastor at Park Hill United Methodist Church in Denver, Colorado. Nathan actually is an elder in the Florida United Methodist Church, the Florida Annual Conference, and he moved to Colorado about 4 years ago to serve this thriving church in Denver, Colorado. Nathan and I go way back. Nathan was one of the first students I met when I was at the University of Miami Wesley Foundation back in 2003. In fact, Nathan and one other student, Shannon, were part of the ministry, and I came in the end of their freshman year and got to watch them grow and mature as college students. I was able to be a part of Nathan's baptism, which was a real exciting thing for me. I remember not only was I there, but Mark Caldwell. The three of us are good friends, and it was a neat experience for us all to share. And then I had the privilege of being able to officiate Nathan and Alicia's wedding. So we've had some real neat experiences together. And even though we're apart as far as distance goes, it's still great to catch up. We've had a few minutes to talk before this video, and I'm just so excited about Nathan joining us today for this conversation that we're continuing about race. As far as Nathan goes, Nathan posted a Facebook article, and there'll be a link to this article on our church Facebook page, but a link about another pastor in the Denver area. And Nathan, as we start today, I just wanted to see if we could talk a little bit about that article and why you posted it on Facebook today.
Sure, absolutely. Well, it's good to be with you, Marcus, and good to be with you, First Church. Thank you for the invitation and being able to come and spend, and just frankly to be able to get to catch up with you a little bit is worth the time and the experience. So yeah, I posted an article yesterday of a United Methodist pastor here in town in a suburb called Highlands Ranch. Her name is Akila. Akila is an African-American woman who had come here last year from New York to serve as, I believe, the executive pastor of a church in Highlands Ranch. Came, and it sounds like, reading through the article and some of the conversations I've heard her speak, that she had less than a great experience helping to lead that church, and experienced all types of racism, microaggressions, we sometimes call them. And that article details an experience that she and her family had trying to buy a car, and what that was like, experiences that her children had at school, and how one of the children's friends would treat one of her children differently depending on what adults were in the room. And just her experiences, I think, not matching what she hopefully had anticipated would be like to come to Colorado and to lead a church, and to lead what we oftentimes call here in the Rocky Mountain or the Mountain Sky Conference, one of our more progressive churches, and that her experience didn't match that reality, and got to the point where she felt it wasn't a safe place, whether that be the church, I'm not sure, or certainly the way the article talked about that, being in that community wasn't safe for her and her family anymore. And so she made the decision to head back to New York and to continue her ministry in New York. And I posted it because I think I forget exactly what I wrote, but something along the lines of, I'm not finding the right words to say, but I'm nodding my head knowingly, meaning, yep, I've had those experiences, and wasn't surprised to hear that. Disappointed for sure, frustrated, angry maybe even, to hear that had been her experience. But as African American, as biracial man within the United Methodist Church, and leading United Methodist churches, and just living, frankly, but certainly as a pastor, that those are unfortunately not unique experiences. And so I wanted to make note that that's been part of my experience leading churches in Florida and even here in Colorado, that we're still experiencing racism. It is a hard reality of our lives.
Yeah. Well, I think what hit my heartstrings just reading the article this morning, Nathan, was the article talked about her two children. It said they were biracial. And, my wife, Rebecca, and I, we've been on the fostering journey that we've been going through for the last 4 to 5 years. And we have 2 little girls now that it's looking very likely that we might be adopting in the next couple months. And of course, they're biracial. So when I read this and then thought about, these could be our girls, going to school and getting some of this treatment. And I know part of your story growing up is, this same journey. And I just wanted to see if you would share a little bit about your story, Nathan. What you'd feel comfortable. Don't feel like you have to go, 2 hours, but whatever you would like to share about who you are and your journey.
That's right. So I was born on November. No. Yeah, first of all, congratulations to you and Rebecca. We'll be continuing to pray for you guys. I know this has been a long journey in many different ways. And so we'll definitely continue to keep you guys in our prayers, and would love to be a resource or continue to be a resource as you are parenting and what that might be like for you as Anglos or whites parenting biracial children. Would say, find other folks that are in your same situation and lean on them and what their experiences are and what they've learned. Put you in touch with my parents maybe or something, but
we'll let them reach out to Uncle Nathan, right?
That's right. Yeah. We would be happy to do that. And honestly, that's been, this isn't exactly what you asked, and I'll get back to my story, but that's been one of the questions, topics that frequently happens or arises in the life of Park Hill. We have many interracial families that have biracial children, and we have several families that are white that have adopted children of color, whether that be African Americans here in the States or have adopted from overseas. And literally I've had conversations where white parents have sat down in my office and said, Pastor Nathan, help, what do I do? I don't know how to relate to this experience that my child is having. Do you have advice, or what could I do? And so we've had those conversations, a real need. And so I would say, you and Rebecca, find other folks that are in your similar situation, or folks that you trust, whether that's me or others, to reach out to. So I grew up in Northeastern Ohio. My father is Black, my mother's white. I think there were times in my life, as I look back, where I felt like I was really shielded from a lot of racism. And then there are other times when I go, oh goodness, that's what you were experiencing. We have the stories that maybe others have heard of, being in the mall, my little sister and I trying to find a Christmas gift for my mother, at JCPenney, and being literally followed by security as we walked around the store. I've learned, and you can still watch me as I shop, trying to keep my arms as close to my side as possible, so there's no question of where are my hands going or what am I trying to do. I've had stories of, middle school romance, right? But ending because parents said, no, you can't date him because he's Black. And the stories would go on and on with some of those stories growing up. I think there's constantly questions of identity. Half my family is white, half my family is Black. What does that mean for me, right? Sometimes it's really great. I get 2 different worlds to live in. Other times it can feel extremely isolating. We had an experience in our conference several years ago where we had to do training around race and different cultures that was required for all of us clergy. And there was some exercise of like, you identify with this group, go over to this side of the room. Or if you identify with this group, go to this side of the room. And I just stood in the middle, like,
yeah,
that's nice. And so it's not nice, and so I think there were definitely times throughout my childhood, where it was kind of like, who am I? What am I? Where do I belong? Church filled a lot of those gaps for me, I'm thankful to say. But I think that was part of my experience growing up. I've grown more comfortable in my identity as a biracial man and as a Black man. And I think that's really what I've had to come to grips with throughout my adult life, is I can see myself however I want to see myself, but the world sees me as a Black man. When I walk down the street, when I get into the pulpit, when I'm driving, when I'm shopping, when I'm living my life, they don't see my white mom or my white family. They see my dad's family. They see the color of my skin and respond accordingly. And so I think that's been the largest learning curve throughout my life when it comes to identity or to races. We have in this country laws where, the one drop rule, where some of that has played into this historically. And so, I always dance around a little bit. I want to honor my mom and who she is and the role that she had and played in my life. And so there are times when I want to proudly claim I'm a biracial man, right? And I don't want to diss my mom. Um, but there are other times where it doesn't matter how, like I said, I identify myself. Other folks see me as a Black man.
Sure, sure. Well, as I've shared, a little bit with you over the years, First Boca is a predominantly white congregation. We're an older congregation. We've got two campuses, East and West Boca. What if you could share a message from the pulpit at a predominantly white church in South Florida? What are some words you would share with us during this season we're going through? What are some things you would like us to hear from your perspective about things we're experiencing in the world right now, our country right now?
Yeah, I think there are a couple. I was going to say I've done that before, but I guess not to a predominantly white congregation in South Florida, but to predominantly white congregations
Yes.
in the state for sure. But I mean, we're tired and we need your help. What I tell a lot of folks is, everything that you have been going through, especially through the pandemic and adjusting to life through the pandemic, African Americans are also going through it, but we're doing it while Black. And I think that's been I said this in one of the conversations I was having here locally. We started to see pretty quickly how COVID was disproportionately affecting communities of color, which to me was another reminder to us, as if we needed a reminder, but another reminder to us of our status in society. And then George Floyd was killed. Another reminder, again, I think that's part of why we've seen the reactions that we have throughout our country. But I think, like I said, we're tired and we need your help. If you're tired and you're watching this, or if you're worried about how you're going to pay bills, or you're worried about contracting COVID, or dealing with your health, or not being able to worship in person, or whatever else it might be, all those things are still happening in communities of color and in Black communities, but we're going through all of that with dark skin. And we can't hide that when we walk into a room. People can identify us just by simply looking at us. And so I think that comes in, that all those issues that people are struggling with, or challenges that we're all going through, whatever your status is in life, imagine doing that then with dark skin as a Black person, right? And so we need help. And what I told my congregation, which is a multiracial congregation, Sunday after George Floyd was killed, was I addressed our white members of our congregation and said, look, we're tired, we're exhausted, we're angry, we're upset, and we need your help. Right? We need your help. We need you to listen to our stories and things like this, which is part of why, not just because I want to come and hang out with my friend Marcus, but is listening to our stories and believing our stories, and then allowing us to lead. We can't do it by ourselves, right? And that's, some folks talk about that, let the voices of those who are on the margins, or those that are underrepresented, let them be the leaders. We can be the leaders, but we can't lead by ourselves. And we also need people that are willing to follow if we're going to be leading. Sure. And so to me, that's kind of a multi-pronged approach, is saying we need help, and we need you to listen to our stories and believe our stories and our experiences, even when they're like, seriously, that happens. And then work with us to allow us to lead, but also to follow. And then sometimes know, I'm a runner, as you know, a marathoner, and I use imagery like that sometimes. Sometimes we're going to be with the baton, or we're going to be up front, or we're going to be taking the lead, and we want you to come and follow. But other times we're going to need a water break, and we're going to need you to take the lead, and so we can follow or draft behind you. And I think, if we're talking, what would I say to a church, right? We've got to add in the God part, right? The Jesus part to this conversation, which is, if we take seriously that everyone has been created in the image of God, how are we honoring that?
Yep.
How are we making sure that people know that and are experiencing that they've been created in the image of God? We want to use our Wesleyan terms of grace and prevenient grace. How are people experiencing the grace of God in their life? Or where are they not, and how can we help them to be able to experience God's presence or God's grace in their life? So I don't know, something around that. We need help. We're tired and we need help. I mean, that would probably be where it would start.
That's great. That's if someone said, "What's a tangible way we could help?" What's one thing that pops into your mind? Because I can already hear it now in discussion. Well, that's great, but Pastor, what's a tangible way we can be that help that Pastor Nathan is asking us to be?
Yeah, I think coming to this study, right, that you're doing at your church is a start. Coming to the study, having conversations, listening to Blacks when we talk, when we lead, being, this sounds too kind of big, but being willing to change. I think, frankly, the story that we talked about with Aquila is a symptom of a system that is not willing to change. We are pretty good at tokenizing people that are on the margins, whether it's African Americans, people with different sexualities, young people, elderly, whatever it might be. We're really good at including, well, sometimes we're really good, but we're really good at inviting folks maybe to sit at the table, but not to be willing to be actually changed by what they're suggesting or by their experiences. And so how are we changing? How are you changing? Because you are going to hear what I'm saying or what you've heard from other talks or from your neighbors or your family members or friends that are having these experiences. So how are you changing? We can't change the system if we're not willing ourselves to change, and they both need to be changed. Otherwise, I think, I don't know if this is a bad word, and I'm coming to grips with it myself, but reparations, and what does that begin to look like? I use the illustration with one of my colleagues out here of, it is great if you see me fall down and you finally have recognized that I've broken my leg. But it's not enough to say, oh man, I'm really sorry your leg is broken. If I was on the way to go to church, right, or I was running and I fell down and broke my leg, and you were on the way too, and you just kept going, and you actually made it to church or wherever it was that you were headed, but I'm still back there trying to figure out how to get there, and my leg is broken and it's hurt. How are you going to pick me up and put me where I need to go or where I was headed? And to me, that's an illustration of reparations. And I don't know what that looks like exactly. I hopefully smarter people than I am are working on that. But and to me, that's a change, right? That's going to require us societally and individually to change. I think when I talk about reparations, or I've heard people talk about reparations, it is this idea of like, well, I didn't do the harm, right? I'm just part of a system, or that was my ancestors, or I worked really hard for what I've earned or what I have now, and so everybody should have to do that. And the idea is, again, like, great, you recognize that your friends and your siblings or people you work with or that you go to church with have been wronged or are going through this. That's a start. But how do we, I would have been at the church already had I not broken my leg, but I broke my leg. So how do I get back to where I would have been, or even further to where I would be now, right? So I don't know if that's tangible enough, but I think it's a start. Being willing to change, being willing to vote and elect people that are willing to, make changes to the system, I think would be a part of that. Being more aware, asking questions, listening. Yeah,
No,
we talk a
that's
lot. I was gonna say we talk a lot here about, God expects us to use our resources to care for one another, and our resources, whether that's our time or our money or our sweat, our spiritual gifts, our influence, our personality, whatever it is that God expects us to use those to further the kingdom, right? To make sure that if we say that everyone's created in the image of God, then we're putting our resources where our mouth is, if you will.
yeah, no, that's so. Here's more of a personal question, just to tie it in. What if the same type of question, but instead of saying what's something you'd like to tell the church, what's something you'd like to tell a friend? What's something you would like me to know during this time about you, or something you would encourage or challenge me to think about in my life as we're going through this together?
Yeah. Trying to think, what do I tell my running buddies in the morning, right? That's what I'm thinking, that the folks that I see the most.
Well, people that know me know I'm not one of your running buddies, but
That's right. That's right. I'm trying to think, what would it be different? I think I would tell, more stories of my experiences. For a similar vein of what I said to church in general, which would be like, one of our colleagues several years ago, I was having a conversation with her, and I said something about the difficulties of pastoring a multicultural and multiracial church, and she blew me off and said, "Okay, everybody's church is hard."
Mm,
Um, and I think what I would say is, yes, right? We're all trying to make budgets. We're all hopefully trying to make disciples for the transformation of the world, and there are inherently hard things about the work that you and I do, but doing it in different contexts does make a difference, and does make the job easier or harder than in other places. And I think my suspicion is that she would recognize that now, but she did not in that moment.
mm,
And I think that's a perfect way to invalidate somebody's experience, right? Is to say, oh no, it's all hard, or we all have challenges. Instead of just, you should have just listened. I think that would have been one thing, right? Is to just listen to somebody's experience. But yeah, I think, otherwise I'd say keep doing what you're doing, Marcus. Like, reach out to people and ask and listen and ask how you can help. And most of us are going to say just you reaching out, and that's what lots of folks did. Right after George Floyd's death, I had a long list of friends and colleagues that sent me texts or emails or called and just said, "Hey, I just want to check in and see how you're doing." Um,
mm.
that recognition that something has happened in the world or in our lives that has caused us pain or might be bringing up, painful situations in the past, I think is, again, another tangible step. When you ask about what's a tangible thing you can do that means something, is, oh my gosh, this person in my life recognizes this thing is hard for me. I have a buddy who is agnostic, and he reached out to me and said, "Look, I know you're probably prepping your sermon for Sunday this weekend. I have no idea what you're gonna say, but just know that I'm thinking about you."
Wow.
And so, yeah, I'd say, keep doing that, and you're doing that, Marcus. And so, yeah.
Yep. No, that's well. Any last comments you would like to share? Again, we're going to be taking this and then going into small groups, and just sort of talking about, like one of the things I know one of our questions will be is about reparations. That's something that another question I think will be about some of the tangible things we can do. Reverend William Cheney, who we talked to last week, also mentioned we have a very important thing that we can do, and that's vote, and take voting seriously and encourage people to go out and vote. And you mentioned the same thing. So I think that's something we'll have some conversation about, is how we can tangibly make a difference through voting. But anything else, Nathan, you can think of as just any other points you would like to, again, just share with us as we're trying to be, as we're calling this study quick to listen. We're trying to really listen and maybe hear some things for the very first time.
Yeah, I mean, I would reemphasize, you're in Florida, right? I'm in Colorado. How our vote goes in November, we do have a pretty critical race, in my opinion, out here, but we're talking nationally. You all are in Florida, and so your votes, we know, as I know, I've lived there for quite some time, are going to be critically important. And
Well, we're
so,
in Palm
how are
Beach with the
you?
Chads too, so.
For sure. I just watched that movie a couple of weeks ago, but I think it was like 2008 or something. They did a movie. Are you going to be willing to vote not only for your own self-interest, but for the interest of others? And might you even vote in a way that puts others before yourself? You know, how it sounds cheesy, but how would Jesus vote? And I don't know that answer necessarily, but I think that maybe that's a question we ask as we
Sure.
go into the polling booth or as we fill those circles in. No, I think otherwise, you know, final closing thought would be like, how does your relationship, you know, with God impact this conversation?
Mhm.
I always say, you know, Jesus was asked time and time again, you know, what are the greatest commandments? How do I inherit eternal life? Who is my neighbor? And Jesus, you know, summarizes Deuteronomy in the book of Leviticus and says, love God and love your neighbor like you love yourself. I think that God calls us to do this work. I always challenge my congregations, you know, Jesus ends up on a cross at the end of his life. This isn't, being a Christian, following Jesus is not supposed to be easy or comfortable. Loving God and loving neighbor is hard work, and I don't do it anywhere near perfect. But it's what we're called to do, and so we're going to be uncomfortable when we do that. We are resurrection people, and so death on the cross isn't the end of the story. We have hope for a new life, right? Abundant life. But you know, it's Paul later on in the Bible that says when part of the body is hurting, the whole body is hurting. Part of
Yep.
the body of Christ right now is crying out in our country and really around the world, but particularly here when we talk about Black lives, it's crying out and saying we are hurting and we've been hurting for a long, long time. And if part of the body is hurting, the whole body is hurting, and we've got work to do. And so we are called to continue to do that work.
I think that's a powerful ending for us, a way, Nathan, for us just to be reminded about what really does matter. I want to just say thank you for your time. Thank you for your friendship. I'm drinking out of a glass today that brings back good memories of our time at the university. You've got your university in my, oh, looky there. It's the U. It's all about the U. But again, it's exciting to hear the amazing things that you're doing. I'm gonna get a couple links to some of the articles that have been put out recently, particularly the Sunday after George Floyd's death. If you can just send me that, I'll make sure the church gets to see that as we have continued conversations. But Nathan, it's been, as always, great talking with you. Say hello to Alicia. We love and miss you both, okay?
All right, we love you as well. Tell Rebecca hi for me.
Okay. Thanks for joining us, Nathan.
Absolutely.